This is Jim Nelson, and we'll kick off here with actually a couple of cases, one that's identified here and another one that's a recent case that just came down to kind of give a little bit of the context of kind of the factual shifting landscape that underlies outsourcing contracts. As suggested in the title, our focus and effort today is really to look at how things have continued to change in the outsourced sourcing communities and how to best adapt to those changing circumstances. So one kind of data point that has now passed a little bit, so we've even got a better perspective as to what the response was and how things transpired, was with Satyam. As most of you, or many of you probably know, January of last year, Satyam had a major upheaval when the CEO of the company was forced to come forth and explain himself as it related to what turned out to be a substantial amount of accounting irregularities and difficulties with the numbers that were being kept by the company. We actually had the opportunity, Wayne was here as well, as a general counsel who was with the company at the time of the problems and remains there as it adapts today, came and gave a little bit of a background and story. And interesting, Satyam is obviously a major player, was a major player in the outsourcing space. And I think a lot of the forward momentum gave people a lot of comfort as it related to what the organization was and what it was doing. A lot of the background we received was really the insight of this company that had grown rapidly from a closely held company to a public company. However, much of the operations internally was still operated on a very closely held basis, and in fact, the practices of the leadership were not open to the level of scrutiny and review that should have been or would have been expected by most people who were interacting with a public company, and therefore the accounting problems happened. So as you all may recall, in the wake of that, essentially once it was revealed that Satyam had these huge problems, there was, I know I had received a number of calls, and it became very active in the community, this discussion of what do I do with my contract with Satyam? They may not be around next week, let alone next month. And so there was a fast process both with customers and also within Satyam to try and adapt to the circumstance. Satyam itself did proactively address the situation. The government of India got involved directly because of its importance in the overall Indian economy and really the perspective for the country worldwide. They were able to weather the storm, and Tech Mahindra, as an Indian company, came along and purchased them in the aftermath of the effects. What that's meant, however, has been significant changes in the customer community, at least in the initial reaction, although I think there's a little bit of things that the more things change, the more they stay the same. I think at minimum, however, it has to give people pause and redouble efforts as it relates to who am I doing business and how am I setting up that business relationship. So strategically, we view this as, the short-term effects clearly inhibited relationships with Satyam and its follow-on relationship with Tech Mahindra, primarily because of the level of doubt and lack of trust as it related to what the relationship was if you're going to hand over your services to them. And long-term, there was a recognition that whether it's Satyam, Tech Mahindra, or whether it's others, this outsourcing process obviously is going to continue due to a variety of factors, cost savings, efficiency, and otherwise. I do think it's interesting that Satyam went through its upheaval, in a low point as it related to economic activity and was able to weather that. And I think it's indicative of the fact that outsourcing is obviously, here and will continue to grow. And it's a matter of adaptation rather than having things that are on or off as it relates to actually outsourcing. So tactically, a lot of issues came up at the point of time with Satyam as well, which was, initially the black-white, how do I get out of this contract? I've got management's on me to make a change. And further things that if I can't get out of the contract, what do I do as far as a bankrupt company? And what do I do as far as the level of trust that's now lacking in the relationship? We hope to speak to those points today as far as the contracting process and working on outsourcing. One other data point, just as an input, I wanted to raise also, to the extent you all might be familiar with it, is there was a recent verdict in the UK between BSkyB and HP EDS that came down at the end of January of this year, where essentially the dispute, and I'll give you a thumbnail sketch for those that aren't aware of it, but essentially there was a contract in place for HP to provide services. I think the total contract value was in the range of $40 million for delivery of services to BSkyB. The relationship went sour. BSkyB ended up suing HP, and there was a key argument that's really come to the forefront here was BSkyB allegations that HP actually fraudulently induced them or made fraudulent representations as it related to entering into the agreement. And in that circumstance, HP was successful in their defense on all claims except for one, which was fraudulent claims regarding the schedule. And I'll get into a slight detail as to how it ended up the way it did. But what happened was BSkyB successfully got around the limitation of liability in the contract because if there's fraud, the limitation cannot apply as a matter of public policy. So therefore, BSkyB at the end of January was given a verdict from a judge in the UK for $1.15 billion US dollars in a claim against HP on a $45 million, somewhere in the $40 million range contract. At bottom, it'll be interesting to see what happens with this because the key issue in the case was one of the key witnesses for HP EDS was soundly impeached by the attorneys for BSkyB, and so the credibility of that witness was a big issue for the judge. The judge said, I can't trust what's coming from this witness, and that ended up being the opening for the judge to find that fraud was involved in the inducement with HP signing up BSkyB for the services. I think it raises two things. One is going to be, it is a factual scenario where it's hard to tell, but I think this one witness as the key pin in the relationship will probably, as it plays out on appeal, it may be the case that that issue reduces itself in value because the reality is on a legal basis, the law really hasn't changed, which is if you can prove fraud, then you can get outside limitations of liability. As a constructive practice, however, I think it's going to cause vendors and customers to focus much more at the inbound contracting process because it's got to be in everybody's mind that statements and representations made during the contracting process could lead to a substantial claim without protection of limitation of liability. And so part of the thing we're going to touch on today as well is really a heightened focus and that much more development on the contracting process and due diligence in particular. So with that, I will hand it over to Wayne.
Great, thanks, Jim. Yeah, I think one of the themes we'll keep coming back to is the concept of risk and how that needs to be kind of the guiding principle in all the deals that we do and the contracts that we sign is trying to identify, categorize, measure, and mitigate all the various risks that come between two parties doing business together. And these are just a couple quotes that give you a sense for the role risk plays and the importance that it plays.